When we started talking about clauses, we said that the subject is what the clause is about. The shark bit the surfer. The naughty boys broke the window. The children ate all the lollies. In many clauses, the subject is a person or being doing something, as in these examples: the shark, the naughty boys, the children. We call this person or being the agent. All these sentences also have someone or something having the action done to them. We can call that someone or something the undergoer. It undergoes the action of the clause. In these sentences, the undergoer is the object noun phrase in each clause: the surfer, the window, the lollies. A clause like this, where the agent is the subject and the undergoer, if there is one, is the object, is called an active clause. However, sometimes we want the undergoer to be what the clause is about. For example, we are likely to care more about the surfer being bitten than about the shark doing the biting. We will probably also care more about the fact that we have a broken window than who broke it, and be concerned about the fact that there are no lollies left. So we make these undergoers the subject, which means that they have to go at the beginning of the clause. We say that a clause in which the undergoer is the subject of the clause is in the passive voice. In a passive clause, the undergoer is the subject. So rather than the subject being someone or something who does something, the subject is someone or something who is acted upon by the agent. The surfer was bitten by the shark. The window was broken by the naughty boys. All the lollies were eaten by the children. But can you see what has happened to the verb phrase in these clauses? To the verb in the verb group and the noun phrase following the verb? When we make a passive clause from an active clause, we can't just move the undergoer, the object noun phrase, to the front of the clause to make it the subject, and move the agent noun phrase to the object position. If we did that, then that is just swapping around which noun phrase is being the agent and which the undergoer. In these rather bizarre sentences, the subject noun phrase at the beginning of the clause is still the agent, and the object noun phrase is still the undergoer. So we end up with a pretty tough surfer biting the shark instead of the other way round, and we have some dark fairy tale scenarios in which windows break naughty boys and lollies eat children. This is not what we intended when we wanted to make the object, the undergoer, the subject of the clause. So what else do we need to do to make a passive clause so that we can have the undergoer as the subject of the clause? Let's look at these sentences that we created and see what we did. How did we put together the passive clauses? First, we took the undergoer object noun phrase and moved it to the front, to the subject position. Then we took the main verb and changed it into the past participle form, the ed, en form. Then we took the auxiliary be and placed it before the main verb. Of course, we can't just put be, we have to use the right form. Remember that a clause has to have tense in it, unless there's a modal auxiliary, and that tense goes on the first verb. So when we put be in as the first verb, it has to be in either the present or past tense. Which one we choose depends on what the tense was in the active clause. For these clauses, the active clause was in the past tense, so we have to use a past tense form of the auxiliary be. Remember that tense is indicated on the main verb if there are no auxiliaries, but it's marked on the first primary auxiliary if there is one or more auxiliary. Finally, we take what was the subject noun phrase, so that is, the noun phrase that tells us who or what the agent is, and we put it after the verb group. But we aren't quite finished yet, are we? You can't say, the surfer was bitten the shark. So what we actually do in creating the passive form of the clause is take the agent noun phrase and put it in a prepositional phrase, with a preposition by. Because this is a special type of prepositional phrase used in forming a passive, it sometimes gets called the by phrase. Now we're really done. Note that passive clauses are fine either with or without the by phrase. We can have the surfer was bitten, the window was broken, all the lollies were eaten. You don't need to mention the agent. This is one of the benefits of being able to make a passive clause. It's important to realise that you can only form a clause that is in the passive voice if the main verb is a transitive or ditransitive verb. This should make sense if you think about the fact that a passive clause involves taking the undergoer, the object-noun phrase, and making it the subject of the sentence. You obviously can't do that if you don't have an object-noun phrase. So you can't make a passive if the main verb is intransitive, as in, the boy cried. Likewise, if the main verb is a copular, you can't form a passive. So if you have a copular clause like, my mother is a doctor, you can't passivize the clause. Yes, there can be a noun phrase after the main verb when the main verb is a copular, but remember that it is a complement, not an object, and you can't move the complement to the front. You can't say, a doctor is been by my mother. Remember that ditransitive clauses have two objects. What do you think that means when it comes to making a passive clause with a ditransitive verb? If you thought it meant that you can make two different passives, one with each object becoming the subject of the passive clause, then you're right. So, think of the ditransitive verb send. You can have a sentence like, the student sent the tutor an email, and we can make either the tutor the subject of the passive, the tutor was sent an email by the students, or an email can be the subject of the passive. An email was sent to the tutor by the students. Let's go through another example of forming a passive so you can be clear of the step-by-step process you should go through to work out how to form a passive clause from any given active clause. Take the sentence, the Garbos collect the rubbish bin. Step 1. We move the undergoer object NP to the front, in subject position. Step 2. We put the main verb in the past participle form. Step 3. We then add the primary auxiliary be, making sure to use the right form. Remember the tense is marked on the first auxiliary. In our example, collect is present tense, so the auxiliary needs to be present tense. Step 4. We move the agent noun phrase to the position after the verb group and put it in a prepositional phrase with the preposition by. And we're done. The last thing we need to talk about with regards to the passive voice is why we would want to use it. Why would we want to have an undergoer as the subject of the clause rather than the agent, the one who actually does something? There are a number of reasons why we might want to do that. For example, we might care more about what happened to the undergoer than who exactly was responsible. This would be the situation with the shark biting the surfer. We probably care more about the surfer than the shark. So since the subject of the clause is what the clause is about, we use the passive voice to make the clause about the poor surfer. This would also be true of a sentence like, I was hit by a car when I tried to cross the street. I want the sentence to be about me, not the car or its stupid driver. In some cases, we might use the passive voice because we actually don't know who the agent is, so we can't very well have the agent as the subject. This would be the case with sentences like, my car was broken into. I don't know who did it, so I can't tell you. Or, a huge shopping mall is being built across the street. I don't know who the builders are. I could find out, but it's really not what is important. In some cases, we may just not care who the agent is, as in, the next assignment will be posted on Blackboard on Monday. If we're talking about this course, then it's probably me who is going to post it, but that's not really what is important to you. What is important is that the assignment becomes available. Another example would be, has the rubbish been collected? I may know who collects the rubbish on my street, but it's not important to me who does it, as long as it gets done. In certain situations, the speaker may be actively trying to conceal who the agent is, as in, the window got broken. This said by a child who doesn't want to admit to being responsible. The passive statement, mistakes were made, has been attributed to former US President Ronald Reagan. Now that we have looked at the details of using auxiliaries to form passives and to indicate aspect, In our last lecture, we will look at combining passive voice and aspect marking in the verb group.